Hey, how's it going? I'm Ron from Widetrack, and we're going to do another special edition of Influences here. Zach and I were having a conversation about we each have our own little specific bands that each of us knows a bit more about than the other, and that we really feel is pretty influential. So perhaps watching these videos will kind of rub off on each other's favorite bands here that we're lesser familiar with. So anyhow, I wanted to just take a quick minute to talk about one of my favorite artists of all time, Tori Amos. Tori Amos to me is you know, when you get talking about artists, male, female artists, whatever, I don't even put her in the category of gender. It's pretty irrelevant to me. She's up there with some of the best musicians. She started out, you know, her story was, just to be real brief about this, her story started off as an interesting one because she kind of had a record deal with a band she had called Why Can't Tori Read, and it was towards the end of the 80s, and it was just this embarrassment of image manipulation, and they had her dressed up like something out of a White Snake video, and it is just awful. And she really learned from that experience that she was like, you know what, Why Can't Tori Read is done. I'm not going to be part of this whole fiasco of trying to sell by my sexuality and all this stupid 80s metal stuff that they were trying to manipulate her image into. So she came out with an album in 1990, I believe, which was her first solo album called Little Earthquakes, and it was just her and her piano. And the songs just really struck a chord, and it was that album for her was a journey of just finding her own voice and proceeding with it with a lot of courage, a lot of artistic courage. And so she started touring by herself with her piano, playing all these, you know, getting played on the alternative radio stations as the 90s were starting to take off. She was kind of fortunate enough to have to take part in that whole scene, and she quickly rose, and her second album, Under the Pink, was a big breakthrough. She had a couple huge singles off that, and it's a great album, as was the first one, Little Earthquakes. That's right around the time she really caught my ear, and I was like, wow, she's interesting performer, and I just loved her voice. Her voice for me, just really, in a similar way that Tom York from Radiohead and David Gilmour from Pink Floyd and these certain artists, their voices just sounded so familiarly haunting to me. And then, so anyway, she proceeded with her next album, which was called Boys for Pele, and that was, she just basically said, I'm gonna make the most out there, the most immediate album that's about myself and what my tastes are at this moment. She did not concern herself at all with commercial success. Quite the contrary. It's to a lot of people, it's a really difficult album to get through, but it's one of her best-selling albums, if not her best-selling album. And there's a really interesting video of her playing in New York when that album came out in '96. She was touring, and she had Maynard from Tool get up on stage and sing "Mohammed My Friend" was the name of the song. And so it was interesting. She started collaborating with a lot of these really cool artists like her and Maynard and Trent Reznor, and she was kind of getting into that whole realm of artistry. She collaborated with Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin on the Led Zeppelin tribute album Encomium. Her and Robert Plant closed the album out with an amazing version of Down by the Seaside, where she plays piano and just sings sings co-vocals with Robert Plant. Anyhow, after Boys for Pele, she decided she was going to get a band, and she assembled this group of musicians that, to me, are some of my favorite musicians in the world. Specifically Matt Chamberlain, not to be confused with Matt Cameron from Soundgarden or Jimmy Chamberlain from the Smashing Pumpkins. Matt Chamberlain, just a fantastic drummer, and he and her from the get-go formed this bond where they were just like, wow, it's like we always played together. And so they put out this album, From the Choir Girl Hotel, and that was when I realized that, like, seeing the footage of that band, and then I saw them live, where I was like, wow, she's just one of my favorite artists of all time. She continued to put out great albums up to the present day. Now she's got a new album. It's relatively new, a year old or so, called Native Invader. And it's been a while since she's put out an album of just her own songs. But this album is one of the best releases of last year. I think it's phenomenal. There's just something, her recording techniques too, the way that her albums are recorded. Her husband is her sound engineer, and they have a studio. They live in England, and they have a nice studio, and her recordings are just some of the best sounding recordings of all time. For me personally, if I were to recommend any of her stuff to people, I mean, take your pick. It's all good, but for me personally, the album Scarlet's Walk, which came out in 2002, I believe, 2001, that to me is just some of the best music I've ever heard. It's just phenomenal on every level. Singing, playing, recording quality. And once again, her live performances are great. You know, she was known for doing a lot of real edgy covers, and so she had this kind of dark, angelic type voice, this girl with a piano, and she would cover anything from Nirvana, Smells Like Teen Spirit, with just voice and a piano. She covered Slayer, Raining Blood. Check it out on YouTube. It's phenomenal. It's quite a bit different from Slayer's version. She's covered the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and all these great bands, and she always does it in her own style, and it was one of the first artists to really drive the point home to me that you can do a song in any way that you want if you're honest about it. And yeah, maybe sometimes you'll hit the mark and other times you'll miss the mark, but hearing her approach to covers really opened things up for me, and it all fits in with the way that her original sound, I mean, they are originals for all intents and purposes, but she always has a little spot in the middle of her concerts where she'll come out and she'll do a few cover songs, and her cover repertoire is just vast. She just knows probably more covers than any other artist out there, but it's always an interesting take on the covers. But more than anything else, I just think she's a phenomenal talent. And one thing that bears mentioning is she was the youngest person who was admitted to the Peabody Conservatory of Music. She was 6 years old, and they let her in there, and she grew bored with it because she wanted to write her own music, and they were trying to kind of tell her, no, you have to play this and that, and she's like, I'm gonna write my own songs. And you know, so before she was even 10 years old, she's driven to write her own songs, and so it just a hugely influential artist. I mean, I know there's things I'm probably forgetting to say about her, but other than that, I've seen her live a few times, and she's never been less than phenomenal, and all of her shows are very unique unto themselves. She always plays a different set list every night. She has a similar songs that she goes through with the tour, but she changes her set list up nightly, and that's a wonderful thing in this day and age. But more than anything, I just wanted to kind of put out there my support of such an artist that kind of forged her own trajectory with things. I once read that she said, you know, there's certain kinds of bands where the audience wants you to kind of repeat the album sounds that you do, and then there's other kinds of bands where the audience gives you permission to put out what you're truly feeling, even if it's different from your last album. And she is the latter. Bands like her and Radiohead and, you know, other bands that are given the latitude by their audience, and that's always been a real inspiring thing to me, that you're not you know, trapped by your success, and that you're able to you know, just follow where your muse takes you. So anyhow, I could go on and on, but check out Tori Amos if you're not familiar, and Zach and I will be getting around to making some Spotify playlists for these bands that we've talked about, and share them with you guys. So in the meantime, thanks for all your support, and more to come soon. Keep on rocking.